I can't delay our esteemed guest, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, retired U.S. Army colonel, author, and defense and foreign policy consultant, who ought to be in the White House, in my view, but instead, at least, he's here on the mother of all talk shows. Colonel, thank you, and my apologies for Sunday night. We experienced some extraneous technical difficulties, as I think you know, but thanks for coming back so swiftly. I wanted to start off by asking you about what might be about to happen in Iran, and if it happens, whether this is in concert with the Trump administration or whether the Trump administration will be dragged into it regardless.
Well, you always ask the easy questions first. I really appreciate that, George. I think the problem is as follows right now. It's pretty clear that President Trump absolutely does not want to go to war with Iran. On the other hand, he's in a difficult position because he owes his office, his position, his influence right now to the enormous support of the Israel lobby and the Jewish diaspora, which has funded it. So I think the decision has been made for the Israelis to take the first step in the direction of attacking Iran, which then puts us logically in the position of having to come to their aid. And I say aid because the Israelis are going to be on the receiving end of serious Iranian attack. And when that attack begins, it's going to be very clear that without us, the Israelis are going to have a tough time surviving. That may seem strange to some people, but I don't think we've ever seen more than a fraction of the capability that Iran has in terms of long-range strike. So I think that's where we're headed. I don't know precisely how this will be triggered. There could be a false flag operation. Something could occur somewhere that is presented as a justification for an Israeli attack. In any case, I think they'll find a way to start it. And then all bets are off because we know the regional war that we all fear will then we begin in earnest. And I don't know where that leads, except that Russia, China, and other states are not going to stand idle and just watch and observe. They'll be very concerned about the outcome.
Well, we know something of Iran's long-range capability, but of course, in these circumstances, one would have to be concerned about their short and medium-range capability also, because any of the U.S. allies, and don't forget Donald Trump was just there, he left dripping in gold and diamonds, metaphorically and literally. All of these American allies in the region will be gravely imperiled, let me put it as short as that, if a shooting war begins between Israel and Iran. And when America gets involved, as logically it would seem ineluctable, then all bets are off, as you put it. The oil and gas fields, the Straits of Hormuz, the whole region will be on fire.
Well, it will certainly start in a way that looks contained. In other words, it will initially be Israel and Iran. But as you say, we have somewhere between 25 and 30,000 U.S. troops, that is soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, who are within range of these weapons. That's one of the reasons that President Trump has been so reluctant to be drawn into this. He knows that we're vulnerable and we cannot protect all these bases that we have in the region. I think the other thing, though, that should not be missed is that President Trump just made an enormous effort to persuade not only Saudi Arabia, but also the Emirates to stay away from BRICS. Now, I don't see any evidence that that will happen. I think the Saudis will be nice to him and will obviously be pleased to invest to some extent in the United States. They would like to play both sides to the middle, but ultimately they are going to join BRICS. The other reason he was there was, as you saw, not just to shake hands with Mr. Jolani, the new dictator of Syria, and war criminal in my estimation, but to reassure Mr. Erdogan, to whom Mr. Jolani reports as his superior, that we are going to back the joint Turkish-Israeli bid for hegemony in the region. All of these things will fall apart once this war begins. The Turks will not stand by and watch a great deal happen before they finally decide to sort of cast off the mask and march against the Israelis. I think everybody in the region, the Sunnis in particular, have been waiting for that. I think that could happen. And again, we are going to find ourselves in a confrontation with Russia. I think the Russians will avoid that in Europe. But on the other hand, in the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, there are lots of opportunities for the Russians to play havoc with us, particularly with their submarines. And the Chinese are also present at sea, although not in great strength, but their submarines are there. A lot of things could go wrong very, very quickly for us. And then the question is, how do you disengage? And I'm sure that's on President Trump's mind because while we're talking, George, I know a lot of people aren't necessarily paying attention to this right now, but the Bank of Japan is virtually given up trying to sell any more of its debt. We have a lot of trouble right now dealing with our own bond market. The bond vigilantes are essentially moving in and saying, we're not buying anything unless you increase the yield. Well, once you hit 5% in the 10-year treasuries, you're in real trouble. We can't service the debt. And right now, the 20-year bonds are up above 5% already. In other words, we're sliding not only into a serious recession, but I think it could end up being a depression. So we really can't afford to do any of the things that President Trump is talking about, whether it's his Golden Dome, missile defense fantasy, or it's the $1 trillion+ defense budget designed to sustain our posture all over the world. Those things are not really attainable anymore. So over the next 60 to 90 days, a war could bring everything to a very serious crisis at home, financially, economically, as well as overseas. That could spell the end of America's long-term imperialist ambitions, let's put it that way.
Just before we turn to the biggest of these big enchiladas, the Russia-Ukraine issue, let me ask you about Giuliani, if I may. Ambassador Ford, not the British Ambassador Ford, who was also ambassador in Syria, but the US Ambassador Ford, who was also in Syria, he was giving a rather injudicious lecture the other day in which he revealed that a British organization had tasked him as long ago as 2022 to groom Giuliani and dust him down, wipe the blood stains off his clothing, put him into a suit and tie, and prepare him for the presidency of Syria, which he now claims he has. At the same time, Secretary Rubio says that all-out horrific civil war may be about to erupt in Syria in the next couple of weeks. What do you make of that?
Well, MI6, the Mossad, and the CIA have all jointly orchestrated the events inside Syria. However, having said that, none of it would have happened without Mr. Erdogan's personal involvement and support. You couldn't have had the armed forces move as rapidly as they did and as effectively as they did to replace Mr. Assad had he not been involved. I think the Turks may come to the conclusion that the only way to avert that catastrophe is for them to actually move into Syria themselves. So I don't think it's impossible that we might see a Turkish military intervention directly into the country because the Turks don't want trouble with the Russians. And they have had difficulties with Mr. Giuliani's forces in terms of keeping them from attacking Alawites and others in the vicinity of the Russian forces on the coast. So it may be that Mr. Erdogan does that. That may also provide him with a useful cover to prepare for a confrontation with the Israelis, because the Israelis haven't been very smart about the way they're handling these things. They've made it known that they want to annex southern Syria. And frankly, they convey the impression that they intend to move into Damascus. And of course, that's one of the greatest cities of Islam. You know, you have the Ahmad Mosque there, which was built centuries ago. It's one of the first places that the Turkish intelligence chief went to pray when he visited Damascus. I imagine that Mr. Erdogan would want to do something similar. It's a messy situation, and under those circumstances, Mr. Erdogan may go in. Then Mr. Trump is in the unfortunate position of having to explain how his good friend, Mr. Erdogan, has taken steps that he did not clear first with Mr. Trump. But I don't think Mr. Trump is in charge, frankly, of what's happening there or in Ukraine. I think events are outpacing him. The good news is that in Ukraine, he'll probably say, the hell with this, pack up his toys and go home, which would be a good thing, especially if he suspends aid to this regime in Kiev, which he should have done when he took office, and then pull all the Americans out. That would be very good. I think he's inclined to move in that direction. But the Middle East is a place where he just can't simply quickly disengage. So I think things are going to get worse before they get better in the Middle East. And Ukraine may benefit from our lack of interest and our myopic focus on Israel.
What did you make of the 2-hour telephone call, which seems a long telephone call?
I think Mr. Putin is always polite and gentlemanly. He's tried to talk to Mr. Trump in a way to make him understand that Russia's essential conditions and goals are unchanged, and that there will be no ceasefire until those conditions are met. But at the same time, he's trying to be flexible, and he listened carefully to what Mr. Trump said. But the ultimate outcome of the phone call was nothing. It's just nothing. Mr. Zelensky knows that the worst thing that can happen to him at this point is to shut down the war. Because as soon as he shuts down the war, those troops are going to head to Kiev. Where would you go as a Ukrainian soldier right now? I think you'd go to Kiev to rid yourself of Mr. Zelensky. So why would he really want a ceasefire? His best hope for survival in his mind at this stage is to keep the war going as long as possible. Obviously, the Russians would be delighted if the Ukrainians took control of their own destiny finally, wrenched it away from the hands of the CIA and MI6 and the Mossad and everybody else who is in Ukraine, and established a new government. A Ukrainian army relieved of the responsibility of having to man a front they can no longer man would be able to do that. But that would be the end of Mr. Zelensky, I suspect. So again, I think the situation in Ukraine has the potential to end well, at least from our standpoint now, from the standpoint of the globalists that rule Europe. Your government, Mr. Starmer or Mr. Macron or this man Merz, that's a nightmare, because increasingly the populations in Europe are discovering that they're ruled by people who will do anything in their power to destroy them. And that's beginning to sink in. It's begun to sink in Germany. It's sunk in Poland. I think the French are reaching that point. I keep waiting for a revolution to break out somewhere. What happened in England? Where's Cromwell when you need him?
I'm here. I'm available, but that's another matter. Colonel, just finally, it's becoming very dangerous to be one of the potential next governors of Ukraine. The assassination in broad daylight, mob-style assassination, complete with the final shot to the head while the man was lying on the ground at the American Language School. This is a former member of parliament, a former aide to Yanukovych, the former president, a man who might well have been in the running for office, but now he's dead. It's beginning to look like the gloves are off everywhere, including in Kiev. There's high-level resignations from senior military figures and all kinds of blood-curdling threats circulating. It might very well be that this war will be ended in Kiev by the Ukrainians.
Well, that I think is everybody's hope. As bloody and ugly as it will undoubtedly be, I think most people are looking for a Mussolini-style solution to the government, similar to what happened in Italy. And the Russians, frankly, don't really want to go in there. They never have. This is the big lie that Russia wants to conquer and rule Ukraine. Of course not. It was so disappointing to hear President Trump repeat this nonsense recently. And I don't know what happened to him because he knew better just a few months ago. But I think that's coming. It needs to happen, George. It's best for that to occur and a new leadership to emerge on its own than it is for intervention by the Russians or us or anybody else. And to the extent that the Russian FSB can support it, I'm sure they're at it right now because not much happens in Ukraine they don't know about. After all, they've lived together for centuries. But you're right. We're going to see more of that. And people are going to be aghast. But here's the last thing to remember. We're mightily responsible for this. My country is a co-belligerent. How could Donald Trump hope to mediate anything when we are allied with this regime? We've supported it. We armed it. We encouraged it. Now we know that American and British generals have had a hand in directing the catastrophe from Wiesbaden and other places in Central Europe. I mean, my God, how bad can it get? So the best thing we can do at this point, best thing that President Trump can do is pull the plug on it and get out. I would hope the British would do something similar, but I don't see much evidence for that yet.
Well, of course, we now know it was all being done by autopen because Jake Tapper, who told us that such theses were Russian disinformation, has now written a book saying that Joe Biden simply was not mentally competent to be the president for a substantial part of his term and maybe all of his term. So who, as Donald Trump asked today, who was manning the autopen that created this monumental issue in the Ukraine?
Well, there are a number of names that have been tossed out that are holdovers from the Obama administration, as you know, who are actually calling the shots, I suspect. People thought that President Obama was, I don't know. He undoubtedly had input. A number of people did. Because, as you say, when the man was elected, he was already unfit for office. You know, my concern at this point is that President Trump is also showing his age. I've begun wondering whether or not we don't need some sort of a new ruling that says you can't be over the age of 65 and be president of the United States. We've always worried about someone that might be too young. We've never feared what we see happening today with someone who might be too old. But I think Biden was always a useful instrument. He was a facade, and others were shaping policy. And certainly his Secretary of State, his National Security Advisor were key players in all of that, but they were receiving instructions and input from others. And it was so nice of Jake Tapper to now reveal these kinds of things when he knew from the very beginning this was the case. That's what's so frustrating. I mean, he's a co-conspirator in the big lie. The whole city is in need of an enema. I hate to be blunt, but it is just rotten to the core right now. It makes Versailles look competent and insightful in 1789.